ACC Nation football preview with our special guest, the publisher of Devils Illustrated, Conor O'Neill. Thanks for joining us, Conor.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's always a pleasure.
A lot to talk about with Duke football, especially after last year, Mike Elko surprising everybody, coming up with a 9-4 record. And people are going, what happened? Well, there's a lot to talk about, like I said, so let's start talking about it. What has Elko brought to this program that we haven't seen in the years previous?
The most best way to put it is it's just a fresh air. It's a different voice. One of the striking things about last year is he didn't come in with some mass wave of transfers and freshmen that won those games last year. It was a lot of the same players that were at Duke and won 5 games in the previous 2 years combined. Riley Leonard was a project quarterback that was kind of that project had just been started under David Cutcliffe, and they come in and turn him into a guy that I think it was 20 touchdowns and 6 interceptions through the air, almost 3,000 yards, and then another 13 touchdowns and I think 699. I think he came up 1 yard shy of getting to 700 for rushing yards, and it would have been 800 some if we move away from the arcane statting that gives us QBs get negative yardage for sacks, which is just the worst. But I digress. No, it was just fresh energy, and nobody around Duke is going to deny that David Cutcliffe did not have a magical 15-year run, right? He got Duke to an ACC championship game within 10 years of them being the bad news bears of ACC football under Ted Roof. I think, what was it, 2-42 or 4-38, some ridiculously awful record like that. And he had him playing that Florida State team that went to the national championship and went undefeated in 2013. So David Cutcliffe did great things at Duke, but it was sour at the end. There's no beating around the bush here. Like it was a program in desperate need of change, and you've got to change to the right guy. And I think that's certainly what happened with Mike Elko, and more. It goes a lot beyond Mike Elko. Like the staff that he brought in, the strength and conditioning crew did a immaculate job getting that team to play as physical and be ready for the season like they did. Kevin Johns, the offensive coordinator, they had to kind of fight to hang on to him in the off season. If you come to Duke and have a really good season and turn a quarterback like Riley Leonard into an all ACC caliber quarterback, you're going to have some bigger schools trying to poach you as their coordinator. So Duke did a great job to hang on to him. That kind of got an upgrade through not the greatest of circumstances with Rob Smith stepping down for personal reasons, but I think Tyler Santucci coming in as defensive coordinator is another reason to think that this team can compete with the schedule, and I'm sure we'll get into that coming up. But yeah, it's the staff that Mike brought in is kind of an all-star staff, as much as an all-star staff as you can say a staff is after being together for 1 year, and that's where kind of the excitement goes moving forward.
I think there's a lot of conversation around this team as, okay, is it a one-off? It's Mike Elko's first year, and as you said, a lot of fresh air pumped into the program and excitement, and things changed. But if you dig a little deeper here and you get past all of these initial, kind of gloom and doom projections, you lost your linebackers and some secondary, but you need to look a little deeper and see they have a lot of returning starters. They have a lot of depth, a lot of experience, and there's some key people who have transferred in that I think are going to probably up this game a little further. The only thing that I see that's in their way, Conor, and give us your thought on this as well. This schedule is not doing them any favors. But at the same time, are we underestimating what this team can do?
Yeah, I actually just wrote the line in a story that's yet to be published as of recording this. You won't find a team in the ACC that has more of a challenge on its plate in moving out of the Coastal Division where anything and everything was possible into this divisionless 14-team amorphous blob that is divisionless ACC football. Duke is going.
I want to stop you right there. Repeat that phrase because this should be used a lot this season.
14-team amorphous blob of what ACC football is going to become. I
love it.
R.I.P. Coastal Chaos.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I mean that is classic. That's a great.
Yeah, the numbers I keep coming back to are there were 5 teams in the ACC last year that didn't go to bowl games. Duke played all of them and went 4-1 against them. The loss was to Georgia Tech right after they fired. Man, he was with us for so short a time, I've already forgotten his name. It was right after Brent Key took over.
Jeff Collins.
Yeah, Jeff Collins.
Just call him Mr.
I won't say anything mean.
Mr. Waffle House. Come on, man.
But yeah, that was their only loss to the team that finished ACC play with a losing record. They beat up on Virginia Tech. I think it's fair to say they got lucky. Like their Atlantic Division crossover was the one Atlantic Division team that didn't go to a bowl game and playing BC, which their offensive line was just decimated, and that Duke struggled to get pressure against most teams last year if they didn't blitz. That BC game on Friday night was like the one time where Duke actually could win some battles and get some pressure with only 3- and 4-man rushes. And then who was the other? Oh, Miami. In the game, I think Miami had 7 or 8 turnovers. They might have just turned it over again, so we need to check that. But anyway, they go from playing those 5 teams last year to 7 of their 8 games against ACC teams or against ACC teams that went to bowls last year. Right? It's a bunch of the old Atlantic Division because it's both Clemson and Florida State. Then you play Wake Forest and NC State, which are those 2 programs that have they're established, right? They have coaches that have been there for a decade each. Their floor is pretty high in Winston-Salem and Raleigh. And then you have Louisville with a new coach. And by the way, Louisville has a pretty easy schedule compared to the rest of the ACC. So, and then the former coastal teams that Duke is playing are Carolina and Pitt, which are the 2 that were atop the division last year, along with Duke. Both of them beat Duke last year in really close games that stung for Duke. And then Duke does get Virginia as kind of that's the one that they play that didn't go to a bowl last year. So it's everything about this season to me is a sliding scale. The schedule difficulty goes from here to here. I'm getting my Zoom window mixed up. So it's all going to be about how far along can Duke's development take them? How far can Riley Leonard come as a second-year quarterback instead of a first-year? How much further can Jalen Calhoun tap into his potential as a fifth-year guy and a go-to receiver? Kind of the same thing for Eli Pankow on the outside. And you can go up and down the roster they have so many guys coming back that it's all going to be about how much better can you get those guys? How much can you develop depth behind them? And then how is that going to compare to how much tougher the schedule is compared to last year?
Here's something to point out. You mentioned that Louisville has a very easy schedule. Pro Football Focus says that not only do they have the easiest schedule in the ACC, but in all of college football. Now, you can take that and come up with all kinds of theories and thoughts about things, but if you look at history, you also see that teams that have those sort of easy schedules like that tend to make a run and sometimes are overrated. So we have to keep a close eye on Louisville this year to sort of just jump in there and throw that piece in there. enough of the generalized stuff, because we can talk, as we have before, continuously about generalized stuff. Let me unleash the beast that is Will and get into specifics, and he can start on either side of the ball that he wants. So let's see what he's got up his sleeve for you, Connor.
Okay. So I actually want to start on defense. Normally we like to start on offense with these, but I think defense is really the key to all this, because this was a team in cut clips last season, gave up over 500 yards per game. And then last year cut it down to under 400 yards a game. It was down to 378 per game. It's easy to say it's just, Mike Elko, but what led to such a drastic improvement on defense?
Oh my God. There's so many things. Like one of the simplest ones to talk about is the guys up the middle that they brought in, or one that they brought in and one they had. I thought Shaka Hayward was a really good linebacker. He just played on really bad defenses for a couple years in 20 and 21. And last year, everybody got to see that. Yeah, he is a good linebacker. He was vital to the middle of Duke's defense. And I associate a lot of what I think about defensive football with what I think about defensive baseball. If you're strong up the middle, you can figure out the rest of it. You can find some corners that can stick with receivers for 4 to 5 seconds. As long as you're strong in the middle and you're not getting gashed and quick hitters aren't crushing you, you can figure some things out and have a halfway decent college defense. So that was Shaka was in the middle at linebacker. One of the additions behind him was Cam Dillon. Cam Dillon came in from, one of the Ivies, and that was a late summer transfer portal addition that nobody really thought much of. And when fall practices started, he was kind of running with the third string, and you didn't really think anything of it. And then after a week or two, he was up with the second string, and it was kind of like, maybe this guy will give him some snaps. Then he was running with the first team when Shaka was kind of on the sidelines and when he was taking a breath, and it was like, Cam Dillon might be pretty decent for this team. I think he was top 5 or top 10 in tackles by the end of the year. He started the bowl game. He played the bowl game and played all through the season, thinking it was going to be his last season of college football, but he had that extra year left. And he did a story in the spring that, he got home and he was ready to take a 6-figure salary job on Wall Street and decided that could wait. And so he's back. So he's the starting middle linebacker this year. And then Darius Joyner was the one at safety that they brought in. He was from the FCS. I think it's Western Illinois. I think he came from. They were 2-9 in 21, and he had 142 tackles for a really, really porous defense. So it's kind of like, okay, this guy's just the safety valve that tackles everybody before they score touchdowns against him. He was Duke's leading tackler last year. I think he finished with 96 or 98. He had a great personality. He told us in preseason camp that, he didn't buy into all the Duke needs a couple years to rebuild. Like he had never been on a losing program until his last year at Western Illinois, and he wasn't going to make his last year of college football a losing season. So he's great. He's going to be a tough one to replace too. But I got to say, other than those two at corner, and Speedy Young was a transfer they brought in from Iowa State. Those are really the only 3 significant losses for this defense. It's a defense that added some key pieces in the portal. The 2 that come to mind immediately are Miles Jones from Texas A&M and Al Blades Jr. from Miami. They're 2 very older and experienced corners. They've dealt with a lot of injury, bad luck in the last couple of years. So really the first knock on wood is to keep them healthy. And then if they can keep them healthy, Duke might have 4 legitimately qualified ACC corners. And in this league with these receivers and the way everybody seems to throw the ball other than Pitt, that's important to have.
Yeah, so this team went from obviously towards the bottom of the league in 21. They were 4th against the run in the league last year. And I felt like this D line, had a pretty solid season, and you get a lot of these guys back, and this is a team that has you mentioned ton of experience up front. And I feel like this is a spot where they could even get better this year.
I love their defensive tackles. I love how Dwayne Carter and Jamion Franklin play off of each other. Dwayne Carter is more of the pass rusher. He's one of the best interior pass rushers I've seen at the college level, outside of the times that you look at Clemson's guys and say, okay, that guy's ready to play in the NFL tomorrow. But Dwayne Carter is a legitimately skilled interior pass rusher. He's good against the run, not to take anything away from him in that category. It's just the pass rush that stands out and the penetration that he gets. And then Jamion Franklin is just a monster on the inside. He's a bowling ball. I kind of joke that he's only shown really one pass rush move, and it's to go straight into the guard or center and push them into the quarterback. But he's a hole plugger. They'll have to find somebody behind them. It's not like they can play two defensive tackles for 70 and 80 snaps a game. They'll need Aeneas Peebles to step up. They might need a freshman to step up, and that would probably be Terry Simmons, who's a big boy they're bringing in, was a high 3-star for us on Rivals. I like their defensive tackles. Their ends, they've got to get more. They've got to get more from their ends. It's kind of as simple as that. RJ Oben had a great spring game, and it's worth mentioning that, but it's also in the same breath worth mentioning that the spring game is quarterbacks are down by touch, and it's really easy to get sacks when all you have to do is reach your hand out and tap the quarterback on the shoulder, and boom, it's a sack, and it's a loss of 8. It's not exactly going to work like that in a month and a half against Cade Klubnik and the rest of the quarterbacks they're going to face. Vincent Anthony Jr. was a freshman last year and made some really strong plays that justified being a true freshman starter. And other times, I mean, he was a true freshman starter who was playing at about 220, 230 pounds. It's kind of as simple as putting weight on him and getting him up to the level where he can withstand being blocked by those big, 310, 320 pound offensive tackles in the ACC that he's going to see. They're one of the reasons Duke blitzed so much last year is because they did not get much edge pressure from just a 4-man rush. That's why Brandon Johnson, their nickel, tied for the team lead in sacks with 5.5 of them. That's why Darius Joyner and Shaka Hayward had their big sacks in the game they needed to win against BC on the road on that Friday night. So that's kind of the name of the game for this defense. They can do a lot of things to kind of sustain and maybe get better from where they were last year. The quickest way to do it is to be able to get 4-man pressure and not blitz, be able to drop back, be able to kind of get exotic with some blitz packages and some looks. And the simplest way they're going to do that is to get more production from the ends.
And you talked about how, with the cornerbacks, you're pretty deep there, but is depth an issue in the back half of the defense?
It certainly is a safety. That's one of probably the main thing I'll have an eye on, at least defensively in fall camp, is, Brandon Johnson had a hell of a year at nickel for this team last year. And if I put my coach hat on, I'm thinking there's no way I'm taking Brandon Johnson away from that position. Like I just want to see him do the exact same things that he did last year. He seemed to have a nose for the ball. He was around so many turnovers. He created pressures that led to other turnovers. But they lost Darius Joyner at safety, and they did not have a ready-made replacement for him on the back end. So it's Jalen Stinson, who had a really nice season and is getting better. The next closest option at safety might be Terry Moore, who was playing running back last year, and that was his first year in the program. He was a freshman running back. I don't know that you want to go into your season thinking Terry Moore is a starting safety. Maybe you do. Maybe he is that good. We have to see it in games to know it. I would think Brandon Johnson is going to play a significant role at safety in addition to taking some nickel snaps. And that's where I think the corner depth can help you in another area. Chandler Rivers played some nickel last year. He can play in there again. The ones that I want to see in the nickel are the two transfer corners I mentioned, because they're both bigger bodied corners. I think Miles Jones is like 6'4", 210 or 220. There's some really, really oversized corners for what you typically see in the ACC. So I want to see if they can go in there, and if they move the nickel, can Brandon Johnson then slide back to safety and kind of shore up another position?
Jim?
You know, I was looking at Blades and Jones, and Blades coming out of Miami and Jones coming out of Texas A&M. The experience in that depth and the height you're referring to with Jones. You've laid out something here, at least from my perspective, that this defense, if it clicks, they've got enough pieces here to make this happen, is going to be a shutdown defense. It's going to be very difficult for people to pass against them. You also pointed out earlier that if you're capable of stopping that run, if you're plugging up the middle with a solid line and good linebacking core, which appears that is in place, this could be a really tough team to deal with. Let's talk about the other tough part of this team. I'm not going to start out with Riley. I think he's got an amazing amount of talent. This kid just stepped up and did whatever he needed to do to carry this team, which a lot of quarterbacks at Duke have had to do for a variety of reasons. But I don't think he has to do it this year. And one of the people that you mentioned earlier is Calhoun. And not only Calhoun, but there's a couple of other guys there. They have a pretty deep wide receiving core, or talented, maybe not so much deep, but very talented, and definitely a threat. If Riley gets the protection and the pocket from that line, and these guys get open, it's on. So talk to us about this wide receiving core, Connor.
Yeah, I wrote in something a couple weeks ago. I think maybe one or two teams in the ACC feel more comfortable about their depth at receiver / tight end than Duke does. You're talking about, I did the numbers, I think it was back in June, or maybe it was the end of spring. It's something like 98.6% of Duke's catches from last year are returning. And there's a sliver of it that the only reason they're not returning is because Terry Moore, the running back, is moving to safety. So I didn't count those.
Yeah.
It's just an absurd amount of players that decided to come back through, whether that's not entering the portal and looking for more guaranteed targets elsewhere, or whether it's in the case of Calhoun coming back. I don't know if he would have been a draft pick, but he certainly would be in an NFL camp in a month, trying to make a roster. And instead, he's back. I thought he was probably one of the more underrated receivers in the ACC last year. He kind of, it's both a product of Duke's system. Like, it wasn't something where you could bank on him getting 12 to 15 targets a game. Sometimes it just wouldn't be there for him. And through anything I saw, he didn't pout about that. It wasn't an issue, because if he wasn't getting those targets, that meant the defense was keyed up on him and somebody else was open. And that's why, it comes to mind that Jordan Moore had a 200-yard game at Pitt last year. So yeah, it's going to be tough for anybody to break their top three. I think of their top three as Calhoun, Pancol, who was the starter when healthy last year, and Jordan Moore in the slot. I think Samir Higgins is a star in the making. He really came on at the end of the season. I think he had 23 of his 32 catches in the last month plus the bowl game. He had a 2-touchdown game there. I think it was against Wake, and had another couple touchdowns. One big one was in that game against BC. That seems to be the only game that I can really remember the specifics from in our chat here. But yeah, it's a deep room. The one that is not to be forgotten is Nicky Dalmolin, the tight end. It wasn't utilized maybe as much as I kind of thought he was going into last season. Part of that is because of how much production they get from the wide receivers. If your receivers are getting production, your tight end might suffer a little bit. But he's an option. He's a weapon, and if teams kind of are more keyed into how good Jordan Moore and Jalen Calhoun are on the outside, and Pankel and Hagens, it's going to open things up for Dalmolin to have a couple big games this year.
Now, like I said, I'm going to skip over Riley Leonard again because I'm going to go to the guys that are behind him. And this is one of the things that always concerns me about a quarterback that runs a lot, is that you have the potential for injury, and that can just take the air right out of a balloon in a heartbeat. But in this particular case, we just laid out the wide receiving core here, and that looks pretty solid. Let's go back into the running backs and talk about how they can also take off some of this pressure from Riley, so that he doesn't have to do the entire thing, and he has multiple options. And it looks to me like he's got a couple of guys here that are workhorses.
Yeah, Jalen Coleman and Jordan Waters are kind of the experienced guys. They both kind of took turns starting last year. Coleman got hurt against Virginia and missed a chunk of the season. Jordan Waters took over. That's when Jaquez Moore stepped up. And Terry Moore was in there at some point. I can't even remember whether Jaquez or Jordan Waters went down to give Terry his shot. It's a deep running back room, man. So it's those three definitely. And I'll tell you what, the most impressive early enrollee they had was Peyton Jones in the spring. And so they moved Terry Moore back to safety, and you're thinking, okay, maybe they only have three running backs that they'll use a ton this year. Then you look at Peyton Jones and you're like, I don't know how they could keep a red shirt on that guy. He can help them right now. I don't know. I'm glad I'm not in charge of distributing the touches among that group, because there's only one ball to go around. There's only so many snaps. There's only so many carries in a game. But it's a deep running back. It's deep receivers, deep running backs, and those are helpful. Like those are two positions you need if you're gonna be covering kickoffs and returning kicks, and they're really valuable positions to have a lot of guys that can play.
What a nice thing for Duke to have a good problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty unusual to hear this. Now let's talk about Riley Leonard. Phenomenal quarterback, and I think has an amazing amount of capability of being a standout quarterback in the ACC. And that says a lot considering the types of quarterbacks that we have in this conference. Let's talk about what his strengths are and what you anticipate seeing him do this year.
He certainly, the hope is that he has a better season than last year, but I think if he wound up around the same numbers, Duke will be thrilled, especially with the turnover number. I don't remember him losing any fumbles. I think Duke only lost one or two fumbles all year, which was a huge factor in the turnaround. And 6 turnovers out of your quarterback across 13 games. You can do a lot of things. You can win a lot of games. You can make up a lot of margins where you're perceived to be in the hole to a more athletic team, more physical team. Thinking of the loss against Pitt, maybe the loss against Carolina, the win against Wake. Those tight games, the turnover margin means everything, and it was in Duke's favor last year. A lot of that had to do with the ball security of his quarterback. One of the interesting kind of preseason topics for Duke would be okay, does Riley Leonard lead this team in rushing again? He led them in rushing last year, and part of that is because their running back room was so deep that they didn't need to have a guy run out there and take 25 to 30 carries in a game. But if your quarterback's out there for every play, he's the one that can take that many carries. He's the one that can keep it on his own read and scamper around the edge. I think it was at least 2 or 3 games last year where Riley's first keep of the game went for like a 60-yard touchdown. Carolina game comes to mind. So yeah, he's pretty special, and it's kind of crazy that it was just kind of this afterthought leftover piece from the previous regime that the current staff was able to come in and mold right away into what they needed him to be, and he answered the call every time they asked him to.
Give Cutcliffe one really big kudos is that man knew how to deal with quarterbacks and how to develop them. That's it. So I'm not saying anything else. Will.
I think the only position we haven't addressed yet is the offensive line. And that was a really good old line last season. I think it was like one of the top in the league in terms of yards per carry. It allowed the fewest sacks in the conference. I think it was like 17 and something close to 400 dropbacks last season. This was a really good offensive line and returns, a lot of parts. Plus, it's a lot deeper this year. So I feel like there is a lot of room for improvement just because on the offense, just because of that.
The depth isn't really there on the offensive line. They got burned a bit. They had 2 guys that came in through the portal in January and were out of the program after spring ball. So you spend 2 scholarships on guys and kind of develop them through spring ball, and then they kind of see that they're not going to be in the position that they thought they were going to be, and decide to look elsewhere for their final season in college football. It just kind of is what it is at that point. Duke's 5 offensive linemen that'll start, I think you feel really good about, right? From left to right. I mean, Graham Barton is a maybe top 3 or 4 round pick if he chooses to exit college next spring. Left tackle. Left guard was Maurice McIntyre, who was a starter last year until he tore his ACL against Georgia Tech and missed the rest of the year. Jacob Monk at center. They love Jacob Monk. I think he's a 3-year captain now, or maybe I'm getting him mixed up with Dwayne Carter. One of those guys is a 3-year captain. The other one's a 2-year captain. So Jacob Monk, they love at center. Justin Pickett is kind of the newcomer who was in that, he started last year as maybe the 8th offensive lineman, and by the end of the year, he had worked his way into the rotation. I think he got a spot starter too. He's going to come in at right guard, and then Alex Hornibrook is the one they brought in from Stanford to be the right tackle. They feel good about those 5. They've got to find 6, 7, and 8. Because the odds of you going through an entire season playing 5 offensive linemen for 800 to 900 snaps each, it's small. And it probably isn't going to happen. This is where you have it's football, injuries happen talk, and they'll need to find those answers in fall camp. They were trying to find them a little bit in spring ball, but like I said, they had 2 guys in there in spring ball that they thought were going to be here. So that's put them in a little bit of a bind there with offensive line depth.
We talked about the schedule a little bit earlier, but just kind of going over it a little more. We obviously opening up with Clemson. They're probably going to be an underdog in that game, but the next 3 games, Lafayette, whatever's left of Northwestern, and at UConn, and then Notre Dame heading into a bye. So I feel like 3-2 is probably a realistic record going out of the bye, but still, even with these tough games, I'm just looking at NC State. I think it's a toss-up. That game's at Wallace Wade. We don't know what NC State's going to be like this year. They're running back the 2021 Virginia offense. Doesn't mean it's going to work again, especially if Robin and I tries to throw a pass to a lineman again.
And not exactly with the same caliber receivers and skill players that Virginia 21 had.
Exactly. but even still, they do, Florida State, an underdog at Louisville, Wake. I still think that even with the little bit tougher schedule, I feel like a bowl game is still definitely a possibility here. What do you think?
I think there is a pretty wide range of possibility that includes this team being better than they were last year and not having quite 9 wins or 8 wins at the end of the regular season, maybe finishing 6-6 and 7-5. And you're sitting there saying it's a good thing this team got to a bowl game. It's a good thing to keep the positive momentum of the program going. You can get into what next year's roster looks like. The schedule will let up a little bit. It's bound to. But yeah, I think that's kind of the target area. If you can get to 8, 9, 10 regular season wins, great. You've done a marvelous job. But I also think 6 wins, 7 wins, if they're against the right teams in there, you're talking about a pretty successful season for this team.
God, if he wins 8, 9, 10 games with this schedule, he's going to get a lot of phone calls, unfortunately. But looking ahead, I think I'm very fascinated by how well the 2024 class is looking for Duke. Just talking recruiting real quick. Rivals has them ranked in the top 30. They have a 4-star. Is it just simply just the momentum of last season carrying this recruiting class?
Momentum of last season. It's also it's not. It's more the people that have been on the Duke explain this to me, because I wasn't here at the beginning of David Cutcliffe's tenure in the mid 2000s. But this staff says a lot of the same things that David Cutcliffe's staff said in the beginning. Like, it's the best of both worlds. They can give you a world-class Duke education, pair you up with so many people in the Duke network post-graduation if you're not going to be an NFL player. Even if you are going to be an NFL player, and whenever your playing career is over, they've got the network connections for you. And then they're trying to meet the dedication that you need to be a top level ACC football program, which frankly, there are some facilities upgrades that are on the books that they'll need to grease the wheels to keep the momentum rolling here. But yeah, it's a staff that knows how to sell Duke. And that's one of the other things that's kind of most impressive to me is how quickly this staff understands Duke and understands what needs to be the selling point. That's huge. And that's how you can land a guy like Chase Tyler is, I think, the 4-star out of the Atlanta area. The quarterback, the other thing that kind of stands out is how national the class is. Quarterback coming from Indiana. They've got several Texas A&M guys on the staff, so they get some Texas connections working. And like one kid coming from Texarkana, another one coming from Schertz, Texas. That's Paul Menke Jr., a high 3-star safety. So it's in a time when it seems like football recruiting becomes more regionalized. Like, you want to get the kids that their parents can drive to your games. Duke is trying to go out and prove that they can recruit on a national level. And it's not like they're going to be beating Georgia and LSU and Alabama next year for recruits. I'm not trying to insinuate they are.
Yeah.
It's taking a couple guys from each spot. Not limiting yourself to, okay, we're going to stick in this 2 to 3 state radius only. That's impressive to me on the recruiting front.
I agree with you there. It's amazing to me that a school, Duke has a great reputation for basketball, great reputation for education, medicine, etc. But football has been flat for so long that it's very difficult to sell people on that. But one of the things that you pointed out was, earlier, some of the players coming back, they were obviously sold on the enthusiasm, the excitement, and the potential. And they saw it. They were a part of it. And that's why they came back. I think that bleeds over into the recruiting aspect. And I think it's a pretty cool thing you pointing out that they're going out and getting their players. People want to go to Duke. It's a beautiful school. It's a beautiful location. Great location there in North Carolina to go to. Great reputation. And as you pointed out too, it's, you know, a connection, that networking connection, whether it be through sports or through education or a combination thereof. A lot of pluses. Tell us some of the stories that you're working on from the standpoint of football, and maybe some of the things that you're looking forward to in basketball, Conor, that we can find at Devils Illustrated.
The next story that'll be up, might be up by the time this gets published, is Duke's 5 most important games they have to win this year. That's looking at, obviously, you know, I like it because it rhymes in the cliche. The most important game is your next game. Well, the most important game to Duke is the next game, but that's because it's the Clemson game. And you beat Clemson on that Monday night, that Labor Day weekend opener, and kind of send shockwaves through not only ACC, but kind of college football also. That would be huge. Looking at games like Florida State, the Notre Dame game. Yeah, I think I have Louisville on there. Yes, might tease a little bit there. Looking at games like that, I'm gonna be kind of taking a look at a lot of top 5s coming up. Top 5 newcomers to watch. Top 5 like non-quarterback most important players. Like, these are the guys that, if they go down this year, you should really be worried about. Probably somebody like Graham Barton would be in there, left tackle, who's playing at an NFL caliber. And then ACC kickoff is right around the corner, so we'll have coverage from Charlotte. Basketball wise, I mean, if it's not the preseason number 1, it's the preseason number 2 or number 3. I think I don't know how much further Duke would slide with returning the 3 sophomores that they have coming back, plus Jeremy Roach for a senior season. John Shire's first season was a success. We can move past everybody being disappointed that they lost 3 games before the new year and they looked terrible in early January games. Like, they were the team to beat in the ACC by the end of the year and won an ACC championship. That's a successful season. Man, that pressure is just going to be turned up so much more because you're not bringing in 7 freshmen. You're not breaking in a brand new team with 11 newcomers and whatever it was last year. Like, the bar is starting a lot higher than it did last year. When you return, Kyle Filipowski's the first ACC Rookie of the Year to return for a sophomore season since Olivier Hanlon for BC in 2013. It's Duke basketball. The expectations are going to be pretty ridiculous, to the point where those early non-conference games, like the first 1 or 2 games that they're going to play before they go play the big name schools. I think the Arizona game is the 10th, and then the Champions Classic against Michigan State is the 14th of November. There are going to be a lot of people that look at the opener against whoever it's against and say, if Duke doesn't win this by 50, then we're in for a world of trouble. That kind of thing. It'll be that type of year. I love that's both exciting and frightening at the same time. Like, I hate covering games where the team wins by 28 and people are telling you how awful the team looked.
I'll tell you a game I'm really looking forward to on the basketball front is I just caught this today. Is Madison Square Garden Baylor on December 20th. I think that's going to be just an awesome game to watch. I'm considering even taking a nice little Amtrak ride up to New York and watching a game, man. So it looks good. Hey, all of these stories and a lot more, you want to have excellent coverage of what's going on with Duke when it comes to football and basketball and so much more. Well, real simple. Go to Devils Illustrated and check out everything that Conor has online. our ACC Nation Duke football preview with our special guest, the publisher of Devils Illustrated, Conor O'Neill. Thank you, sir, for taking some time and telling us a little bit about what to expect this season.
Jim, well, always a pleasure, as I said. Thank you for having me.
Hey, Connor.